Imagine for a moment you are being summoned to a hearing for reasons you cannot fathom, accused of an offense you didn't commit, within a labyrinthine system of bewildering rules. What if that chilling sensation of helplessness, of being entangled in an illogical nightmare, was not merely a literary device, but a reflection of deep-seated anxieties and existential fears? The concept we recognize as Kafkaesque is much more than just a strange, bureaucratic inconvenience. It's a mirror reflecting the pervasive psychological states of powerlessness and alienation we all experience. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand how the Kafkaesque isn't just something you encounter in novels, but something you might be navigating each and every day. Franz Kafka, one of the most provocative and misunderstood writers of the 20th century, held a view so radical that he managed to give a name to a particular form of psychological torment. We're going to explore how his works aren't just fiction, but rather a depiction of real psychological states and a window into the unconscious fears that haunt us all. As we proceed, you will come to see both the world and yourself in a completely new light. This journey will provide a different way of interpreting these recurring, difficult experiences. Why is it that these strange, absurd situations feel so disturbingly familiar? Why do interactions with illogical systems evoke such a powerful sense of dread? Consider, for example, the endless phone menus and automated systems that leave you feeling like your voice is utterly insignificant, or the feeling of facing a bureaucratic wall when trying to resolve even a simple issue. These experiences, while seemingly external, often trigger internal psychological responses that can become overwhelming. The premise we must confront is that the Kafkaesque is not just a literary term. It's a profound reflection of our own psychological states, rooted in feelings of profound powerlessness. These situations are much more than mere external annoyances. They reveal the internal conflicts of the individual and the feelings of utter helplessness they provoke. Kafka's works offer us a window into these inner experiences, allowing us to witness our own internal realities as if they were on display, not merely an external world that is absurd. Consider Gregor Samsa in The Metamorphosis. His literal transformation into an insect parallels the psychological feeling of dehumanization under oppressive circumstances, showing us that Kafka understood the emotional truths that lie beneath literary devices. This feeling of being lost in a maze of bureaucratic nonsensicality, of being judged by unknown authorities for unknown reasons, of a world that seems utterly illogical, isn't as chaotic as it might appear at first glance. There are underlying patterns at play, and as you become more aware of them, you'll start to recognize their recurrence throughout your life. You will also start to see that powerlessness and alienation always go hand in hand, and that the illogical nature of the Kafkaesque always creates feelings of panic and confusion. These patterns often stem from bureaucratic nightmares and illogical power dynamics. They highlight the all-too-common experience of feeling frustrated with systems that seem intentionally designed to confuse and disempower. These are more than just minor inconveniences. They are external events that can trigger profound psychological responses. Think of dealing with overly complex forms, endlessly looping phone trees, or the feeling of being stonewalled by unresponsive authority figures. Each of these scenarios are linked to internal psychological feelings. Joseph K. from The Trial serves as a perfect example. He is caught in a system he doesn't understand, a system that mirrors how people often feel when confronting illogical situations, both in their internal and external worlds. Understanding the Kafkaesque is significant because it speaks directly to our struggles with real-world experiences of powerlessness, absurdity, and alienation. It isn't just some abstract philosophical concept. This is about how you feel, how we all feel. Feeling trapped in these situations isn't a minor inconvenience. It's a major source of stress and anxiety that can extend far beyond the initial event, eventually affecting your view of reality and your sense of self. Consider, for example, the pervasive sense of panic that often accompanies these Kafkaesque encounters. The impact of these feelings can range from minor frustrations to major mental health crises. Repeated exposure to these experiences can erode your self-esteem, increase anxiety, and potentially lead to depression or other forms of psychological distress. The personal costs of ignoring these feelings are substantial, but here's where it gets truly interesting. By gaining a deeper understanding of this phenomenon, you gain access to the tools you need for self-awareness and resilience. It means that you can learn how to navigate these situations instead of being a passive victim. This knowledge will help you recognize Kafkaesque situations and equip you to deal with them in a completely new way. Facing these dark and difficult feelings can ultimately lead to empowerment and psychological growth, enabling you to reclaim agency in a world that can sometimes seem utterly illogical. Franz Kafka was not only a writer, but also a keen observer of psychological states. He possessed a unique ability to express the internal experiences of powerlessness, alienation, and absurdity through his literary works. Take, for instance, his troubled relationship with his father and how it is reflected in many of his works. This shows how his real-life experiences influenced his writings. The Kafkaesque is, in essence, a feeling of being trapped within a system that is both illogical and inescapable. It's a state where you feel disoriented, powerless, and utterly unable to understand or control the situation at hand. Consider the common example of dealing with an overly bureaucratic system, where the rules and procedures are so complex that they seem impossible to navigate. These seemingly external situations reflect deep internal psychological states. The feelings of helplessness, alienation, and inability to understand the world are not merely external reactions. They are clear indications of a deeper, personal process. Think of the feeling of being constantly observed and judged, even if the outside reality does not present any observable threat. This is an indication of the psychological roots of the Kafkaesque. The fundamental pattern is that the external systems connect directly with these internal states. Seemingly logical structures, like bureaucracy, can often produce illogical and overwhelming psychological experiences. Feelings of absurdity, powerlessness, and alienation are often directly linked to real-world situations involving power dynamics and complex, often irrational systems. For example, an overly complex corporate structure can create a deep sense of disorientation in its employees. Have you ever felt like this? Have you ever felt trapped in a system that seemed to make no sense at all? You probably have. Most people have had experiences that fit into this disturbing pattern. While you might recognize these feelings, the origins and implications of such experiences may not yet be clear. There are deeper psychological mechanisms at play that have not yet been revealed, and these will be explored more in the following sections. These feelings are not isolated. They follow a specific pattern. What might seem random is, in reality, a specific psychological phenomenon with specific causes, and understanding this pattern is absolutely key to understanding yourself. Fully understanding these patterns will enable you to cope with them effectively, regain a sense of control, and ultimately achieve personal growth. The knowledge gained in this video will be far more than just theoretical. It will empower you to handle these experiences in a completely different manner. There are tools and strategies that will assist you in your daily life by allowing you to understand the psychological patterns underlying the Kafkaesque experience. So, how do these feelings of being trapped in an illogical system originate? At the heart of the Kafkaesque lies an existential framework, a particular way of seeing the world that is characterized by a deep sense of meaninglessness, alienation, and the absurd. These concepts are not just abstract philosophical ideas. They are the emotional realities that underpin the Kafkaesque experience. For instance, the absurd, in this context, does not simply mean ridiculous. It refers to the fundamental conflict between our human desire for meaning and the apparently meaningless nature of the universe. Consider, for example, the feeling of being stuck in a job that seems pointless, where your daily tasks feel disconnected from any larger purpose, or when your social interactions feel like nothing but empty rituals with no depth. This disorientation, this feeling that the world is not making sense, is the fertile ground from which feelings of anxiety and dread emerge. These are the feelings that are at the core of the Kafkaesque state. It is not simply the presence of illogical systems, but the psychological effect of this meaninglessness on the individual that causes such distress. Franz Kafka's life served as a profound template for the themes he explored in his writing. His strained relationship with his overbearing father, his experiences working within the rigid, often nonsensical structures of the Austro-Hungarian bureaucracy, and his ongoing struggles with his own mental health all deeply influenced his literary style. In his diaries and letters, Kafka frequently reveals his internal turmoil. He writes, "I am separated from all things by a hollow space, and I do not even reach to the edge of it." These words are a window into the alienation he felt, which he then translated into his literary themes. The feeling of being dominated by an external, irrational force was not an abstract concept for Kafka. It was the reality of his daily experience, and this shows in the feeling of being trapped that permeates all his works. The Kafkaesque, therefore, wasn't simply an abstract literary concept for him, but a reflection of his deepest personal struggles. His life was, in many ways, the origin of the term, highlighting the connection between internal psychological states and external circumstances. The Kafkaesque reflects the human struggle with systems, powerlessness, and the feeling of being trapped in a world that often seems designed to frustrate and disorient. Have you ever felt like you were fighting an invisible, illogical system? Have you ever felt completely isolated and misunderstood in the middle of a crowd? These aren't unusual feelings. Consider the frustration of dealing with unresponsive customer service, where automated systems and unhelpful representatives seem intentionally designed to make it impossible to resolve your issue. Think of the maze of bureaucracy in a large corporation, or the feeling of being unfairly judged by the legal system, where the process seems to make no logical sense at all, and you feel that you are a pawn in an absurd game. These aren't just minor inconveniences. These are situations that can trigger a deep psychological response, revealing the power that these feelings have over our inner world. The Kafkaesque situations are far more than just an external annoyance. They reveal the deep internal struggles with powerlessness that are so common in the modern world. At the heart of the Kafkaesque experience is a paradox, a deeply contradictory feeling that is both illogical and confusing. You feel trapped within the system, yet you are also held responsible for navigating it. This creates a constant state of internal conflict. This contradictory nature of the Kafkaesque is highlighted by contrasting imagery. There's a feeling of order, of rules, of systems, but all of these structures lead to a feeling of chaos. There's the feeling of needing to be in control, yet you are constantly faced with helplessness, or the feeling of seeking logic in a situation that is fundamentally illogical. The search for truth or for clarity in a reality that is inherently contradictory can feel like a never-ending loop, a psychological maze with no exit. This unstable landscape shows the tensions that exist at the core of the Kafkaesque. The seemingly logical structures, when examined closely, are nothing more than a confusing and contradictory web where every turn leads to a dead end. The psychological tension within this paradox is the core of what makes the Kafkaesque such a disturbing and unsettling state of mind. The Kafkaesque is not just about bizarre, far-fetched scenarios. It is about the very real psychological effects of experiencing powerlessness, alienation, and an absurd reality. These states warp our perception of reality, eroding our sense of agency, and ultimately triggering deeper psychological wounds. It is not simply a matter of feeling stressed or reacting to external pressures. These experiences are often felt as specific symptoms that reveal a profound underlying psychological struggle. For instance, the feeling of being dehumanized, constantly accused, and never understood are all symptoms that arise from the psychological effects of these situations, and not just mere reactions to them. The Kafkaesque exposes how these feelings can lead to a sense of disconnection from oneself and from the world, a feeling that reality itself is unreliable and that your own mind cannot be trusted. It is crucial to understand that this is a psychological phenomenon that has real consequences, not merely an inconvenience or a minor problem. To better illustrate the thesis, consider the psychological symbolism within Kafka's works. In The Metamorphosis, Gregor Samsa's transformation into an insect symbolizes the feeling of dehumanization that is common in the Kafkaesque experience, where one is reduced to a mere object or a thing stripped of any personal value. In The Trial, Joseph K.'s unending struggle with an unknown authority embodies the fear of unjust judgment and the overwhelming sense of powerlessness that comes from confronting a system that makes no sense. In The Castle, K's quest to gain access to the castle in the face of constant bureaucratic obstacles represents the futile search for meaning in an absurd and ultimately incomprehensible world. These aren't just literary devices. These are portrayals of the psychological states that are at the heart of the Kafkaesque experience. Furthermore, these symbols can be linked to Jungian concepts. For example, the shadow represents the unconscious aspects of the personality that are often denied or suppressed. In Kafka's characters, we can see how the shadow emerges as an overwhelming force, driven by unconscious complexes, a psychological truth that Kafka seems to have intuitively understood and masterfully presented in his work. These literary examples are not confined to the realm of fiction. They are mirrored in real-world situations that many people experience. Consider the psychological effects of prolonged isolation, which can cause feelings of disconnection from reality, much like Gregor's transformation into an insect. Think of the toxic workplace environment, where the constant pressure and lack of control can lead to feelings of anxiety, powerlessness, and ultimately a loss of self-worth, mirroring Joseph K's struggle. Or consider the feelings of helplessness that can accompany the process of navigating an illogical system of bureaucracy, such as a never-ending paperwork process. These are all Kafkaesque scenarios that can cause significant psychological distress, and they are not isolated experiences. They connect directly with the patterns Kafka so powerfully portrayed in his works. These feelings are not simply a reaction to an outside event. They are a psychological state that has its own distinct pattern of cause and effect. When the external world starts to mirror an inner psychological state, one has entered into the Kafkaesque experience. There are, of course, counter-arguments that might dismiss the Kafkaesque as nothing more than mere pessimism, literary exaggeration, or something that is ultimately irrelevant to the modern experience. Some might argue that Kafka's works are simply an expression of his personal anxieties, or that these feelings are outdated and no longer apply to the modern world. However, these arguments fail to address the fact that these themes have persisted throughout history and continue to be reflected in modern psychology, which clearly demonstrates that the Kafkaesque is a recurring experience that is connected to deep psychological needs. While it's true that some see the Kafkaesque as a call for radical change, a kind of rebellion against the absurd, this interpretation doesn't diminish the reality that these kinds of feelings are rooted in profound psychological discomfort and distress. To recognize that these feelings are a real psychological phenomenon and not just an abstract philosophical concept is the key to moving forward. It is in accepting their existence that we can then start to heal. Now, let's turn inward. When was the last time you felt trapped by a system or felt like you were going insane because of the illogical nature of a situation? How did that feel? Take a moment to really sit with that feeling. This is not just about intellectual understanding, it's about personal reflection. What were the specific circumstances? How did that experience impact you on an emotional level? To begin this process, consider the use of journaling to explore these personal experiences in more detail. Record your observations, patterns, feelings, and the scenarios where they usually arise, and the specific patterns that you discover in your personal life. This can be the first step toward gaining clarity. By linking the theoretical to the practical, you can begin to recognize the Kafkaesque patterns in your own life and how they manifest in a unique way in your inner world. The first step in dealing with Kafkaesque situations is to recognize them. Then, you must reframe them and actively seek solutions that are within your own sphere of influence. Instead of focusing on changing the entire system, which is usually impossible, start by focusing on the small interactions, focusing on the people you encounter within the system, and building from these small interactions. You cannot fix the whole system, but you can affect people individually. Instead of trying to fight against a seemingly illogical system, focus on what you can control. Your own responses, your own boundaries, and your inner world. Seek connections with like-minded people, people who understand your point of view and validate your reality, especially when you are experiencing feelings of alienation. Try to focus on the positive elements that you find within a difficult situation, even if these elements are small, as this can give you a new perspective. And create small rituals that can help you to restore a sense of normalcy and order, even when the outside world seems to be completely chaotic. These are all actionable steps to bring back a sense of self-agency. Confronting these feelings and not running away from them has a transformative potential. It will reduce anxiety by allowing you to gain a new clarity. It allows you to become more proactive instead of feeling like a passive victim. Understanding the Kafkaesque is key to reclaiming your sense of agency, even when you might be feeling powerless. This understanding will restore your capacity for joy and wonder, regardless of what the outside world might reflect back to you. When you accept the absurdity of the situation, you gain an internal sense of freedom, which cannot be taken away by external circumstances. When you stop trying to control the uncontrollable and instead start to focus on what you can control, you take back your power, and this is a key element of personal growth. Real-world examples exist of individuals who have successfully navigated Kafkaesque situations and who have reframed their perspectives using tools such as the ones that have been mentioned. Consider, for example, the struggles of political activists fighting against tyrannical regimes, or those going through a long and exhausting legal process that feels utterly unfair. They have managed to find meaning and strength in the face of absurdity, and their stories show that it is possible to overcome even the most difficult of experiences. In summary, the Kafkaesque isn't just a literary phenomenon. It's a psychological reality that reflects a profound struggle with powerlessness, absurdity, and alienation. Recognizing this and learning to manage these feelings is key to improving our own mental well-being and to living a more fulfilling and empowered life. The key is to know that this is a common experience that others have shared and that you don't have to go through it all alone. It's important to acknowledge and accept these feelings instead of running away from them. You must see these moments not as failures, but as opportunities for deep internal work and to build resilience. Perhaps, in understanding the Kafkaesque, we are actually being invited to question not only our external reality, but also our perception of it, our place within it, and what truly constitutes our own agency. To continue this journey of self-discovery, I encourage you to start a Kafka journal, in which you track situations that evoke this state within you. What are the common themes and patterns? What are the feelings and thoughts that are always present? What are the typical situations that trigger these feelings? Start to actively apply the tools that have been suggested to each of these scenarios, and notice the changes that you start to feel within your inner world. I also encourage you to look up Kafkaesque for further reading and research, and to seek out the elements of it in other works that have affected you, and in art that you find meaningful. Finally, share your own experiences with Kafkaesque situations in the comments below. Let's foster a sense of shared understanding and encourage open discussions about these complex emotions. By creating an environment of understanding, we can help each other navigate these difficult feelings and work towards creating a more empowered and fulfilling existence. The feeling of powerlessness, a core element of the Kafkaesque, doesn't just create a sense of being trapped, it profoundly distorts one's perception of reality. The world starts to appear as a more chaotic and unpredictable place, where clear cause and effect relationships begin to break down. This distorted perception further amplifies the feeling of being caught in a situation that one cannot understand, as the system or external environment seems to become an overwhelming negative force. It can start to feel as if the world is actively conspiring against the individual, making them feel less than or not enough. For instance, a person who is constantly criticized or undermined in a work environment might start to perceive themselves as incompetent and unworthy, even when this is not true, thus revealing how external situations start to create internal psychological shifts. This cycle of self-doubt and helplessness is not merely a consequence of a difficult circumstance, but a deep psychological distortion created by the feeling of powerlessness that is so central to the Kafkaesque. This pattern of external systems mirroring internal states goes even deeper, as these seemingly illogical situations can trigger pre-existing insecurities and anxieties, revealing how our inner conflicts and vulnerabilities often manifest as external chaos. The irrationality of a Kafkaesque scenario can magnify these feelings of inadequacy and can trigger a deeper existential crisis. Take, for example, a seemingly simple task at work that turns into a bureaucratic nightmare because of nonsensical procedures. This can, in turn, trigger a person's pre-existing feelings of insecurity about their competence, creating a negative internal loop. Individuals may start to project their inner turmoil onto the external situation, making it appear even more overwhelming and confusing than it already is. This process is not a logical reaction, but a psychological projection, revealing how the external world often becomes a mirror for our own inner landscape. The Kafkaesque state is a complex interplay between our internal and external worlds, and understanding this link is essential to breaking free of it. When powerlessness combines with a distorted perception of reality, the result is a profound disorientation and confusion. In a Kafkaesque experience, individuals often feel utterly lost, as if they have lost their sense of direction, their purpose, or even their understanding of what's happening. This lack of orientation can lead to feelings of panic and an unsettling sense of unreality, where the world seems to lose its solidity and become dreamlike. Imagine, for instance, a person trying to navigate an illogical legal system, where the rules seem to change at random and the procedures make no sense at all. This lack of clarity and the feeling of not understanding what's happening only serves to increase the sense of powerlessness, creating a vicious circle of confusion and anxiety. This disorientation is not simply a mental inconvenience. It's a psychological state that reveals a deep unease in the face of a reality that seems unreliable and inconsistent. This feeling of disorientation can quickly escalate into intense anxiety and a pervasive sense of impending dread. The feeling of being trapped within a system that defies logic can trigger a deep feeling of unease, a constant sense that things will inevitably get worse and never better. This chronic anxiety can have a pervasive effect on daily life, creating a state of hypervigilance, where the individual is constantly waiting for the next shoe to drop. Individuals may experience panic attacks, a constant state of unease, or a feeling that the worst is about to happen, even when there is no immediate threat, if they are in an environment that reminds them of Kafkaesque situations. This constant, underlying sense of dread isn't just a passing emotion. It's a manifestation of the psychological damage inflicted by the Kafkaesque, a state where the world feels inherently dangerous and the individual feels utterly helpless. The Kafkaesque can also lead to deep emotional isolation and a disconcerting sense of detachment from others. When an individual starts to feel as if their reality is fundamentally different from the reality of those around them, it can lead to a profound sense of loneliness and alienation. Others cannot truly understand what they are going through because they are not perceiving the world in the same way. These feelings of isolation can intensify the sense of powerlessness, creating a feeling of being completely disconnected from the human community. A person who is being gaslighted by others, for example, may begin to doubt their own perception of reality, leading to a severe feeling of detachment and loneliness. This is not just a feeling of being alone. It's a deep psychological state of disconnect that is at the heart of the Kafkaesque. This is not simply a reaction to external isolation, but an internal shift where one feels disconnected from their own humanity and that of others. Furthermore, being in a prolonged Kafkaesque situation can lead to a severe loss of personal identity, a feeling of becoming a mere shell of one's former self. People may start to feel as if they are not real, or that their identity has merged with the illogical system, and that they are no longer themselves. This disintegration of personal identity can manifest as a lack of self-worth, pervasive self-doubt, and the feeling of not being truly present in one's own life. For instance, a person who has been working in an oppressive and dehumanizing environment for a long period of time might start to feel as if they are just going through the motions, without any genuine sense of self. This feeling is not just a passing moment of self-doubt, but a fundamental loss of identity, as the Kafkaesque erodes the core sense of self. This is not just an emotional response, but a significant psychological alteration of identity that requires profound internal work to heal. Perhaps one of the most damaging effects of the Kafkaesque is the erosion of personal agency, leading to a feeling of learned helplessness. Long-term exposure to situations where one feels consistently powerless can lead to the belief that one cannot influence their environment, and that no matter what they do, it does not make any difference. This feeling of helplessness can transfer to other areas of one's life, creating a general sense of passivity and the feeling of being at the mercy of circumstances. Consider someone who has repeatedly tried to navigate a system that is designed to be impenetrable and has come to the conclusion that it is impossible to change it. This is more than just feeling unmotivated. It's a deep psychological shift where an individual loses the belief in their capacity to create any change, thus surrendering their agency. This feeling of learned helplessness can be hard to overcome, as it becomes a deeply ingrained psychological pattern. These feelings of despair and hopelessness can create a self-reinforcing cycle, making it even more difficult to break free of Kafkaesque situations. People may start to lose all sense of joy and wonder and fall into a state of passivity, whilst also increasing their underlying feelings of anxiety and dread. This cycle can become self-sustaining, as the more hopeless one feels, the less they try to change the situation, and this pattern only creates even more despair, thus creating a downward spiral of negative emotions. The inability to act can then deepen the sense of helplessness, which in turn reinforces the feeling that one is trapped, thus creating a destructive pattern that can be difficult to escape. This cycle is not simply a series of negative emotions. It's a deep psychological trap that perpetuates itself, revealing the severity of the impact of the Kafkaesque. It's important to recognize how this self-reinforcing pattern must be addressed by actively breaking its negative cycle. However, it is possible to break these patterns. A key step is learning to identify Kafkaesque situations in your own life. Recognizing these patterns is the essential first step toward regaining control and creating a different way of dealing with them. This awareness can act as a powerful tool to stop you from becoming a passive victim of these patterns and to start to reclaim your agency. It is by knowing what you are dealing with that you can begin to formulate a new approach. Ask yourself, am I feeling trapped by a system that is illogical? Do I feel constantly powerless? Am I experiencing a sense of alienation from others? Do I question my own sanity or my own perception of reality? These are just a few of the questions that can lead to a deeper awareness, and that can act as a starting point for change. The ability to identify these patterns is not just an intellectual exercise, but an essential tool for psychological liberation. Once you can identify these patterns, it is essential to reframe the situations in a way that reduces their negative impact. By changing your perspective, you can change the emotional impact of a situation and regain a sense of control, thus diminishing feelings of helplessness and creating a more positive outlook. Instead of focusing on what you cannot control, such as the illogical nature of the system itself, focus on what you can control: your reactions, your boundaries, your responses, and your inner world. For example, if you are dealing with an unresponsive customer service, instead of becoming increasingly frustrated by their illogical procedures, focus on documenting every interaction and on building a case with all the details. This reframing process is not about ignoring the problem, but about changing your relationship to it and creating a new narrative that allows for action instead of passive reaction. Additionally, it's crucial to create small islands of clarity and normalcy within a chaotic environment. By focusing on consistent rituals, you can restore a sense of order, even when the outside world seems unpredictable. For example, starting a daily meditation practice, a journaling routine, or even just having a consistent morning routine can all provide a sense of stability and control that can act as an anchor in times of uncertainty. These islands can act as a psychological oasis, where you can find a sense of safety and inner peace, thus counteracting the chaotic feelings of the Kafkaesque. These seemingly small actions are powerful tools for reclaiming agency and creating a sense of continuity in your inner world. Finally, connecting with like-minded individuals can offer a vital sense of validation and support. When you share your experiences with others, you begin to feel less isolated and less alone, and you also receive validation for your perceptions, especially during those times when you might be doubting your own sanity. This support network is a vital counterforce to the isolation that is so common in Kafkaesque situations. Connecting with people who understand you, who see your point of view, and who can validate your reality can counteract the feeling of confusion and disorientation. The power of community and shared experience should not be underestimated and can be a source of great healing and strength. Real-life examples of individuals who created support groups to help navigate similar situations show just how important this can be. The understanding of the Kafkaesque is not merely an intellectual exercise. It's a deeply personal journey that requires an integration of both knowledge and experience. By linking the information that you've gained with your own personal experiences, you can create a much deeper level of self-awareness and a more profound understanding of your own inner landscape and how it intersects with the external world. This process will create subtle shifts in your perspective and a much more empowered approach to dealing with difficult situations. This journey of self-discovery isn't just about learning abstract concepts. It's about understanding how these concepts manifest in your own life and how you can use this understanding to become more resilient and more self-aware. This internal work creates lasting change. Moreover, embracing the discomfort associated with Kafkaesque situations can be a powerful catalyst for personal transformation. By confronting those darker, more difficult emotions, instead of running away from them, you can become more resilient, more self-aware, and more compassionate towards others, thus creating a huge opportunity for growth. These difficult emotions can help you learn and grow, and can also help you discover hidden strengths and inner resources that you didn't know you possessed. This is not just about tolerating discomfort, it's about actively engaging with it and transforming it into a source of strength and resilience. These challenging emotions are not an obstacle to be avoided, but a pathway towards personal growth and transformation. Ultimately, understanding the Kafkaesque empowers you to become more proactive and to stop being a passive victim of circumstance. It allows you to navigate difficult situations with much more awareness, with intention, and with a renewed sense of self-agency, creating the ability to influence your own life. When you are able to make active choices instead of reacting, you reclaim your power, and this is an essential part of your own personal transformation. People who have been feeling helpless and powerless can transform into empowered agents of change in their own lives when they embrace this understanding, thus showing that the Kafkaesque can be used as an opportunity for personal empowerment. The Kafkaesque is not simply a negative experience. It is also an invitation to question your own perception of reality, to gain a deeper understanding of yourself, and to take charge of your own life. By recognizing, reframing, and integrating these difficult experiences, you can reclaim your personal agency and create a more fulfilling life. The next step is to see these difficult patterns as an opportunity for growth, and to know that you are not alone in these experiences. This recognition will help you reclaim your power. This journey of recognizing and reframing Kafkaesque situations, however, is not always easy. One of the major obstacles is the vicious cycle of powerlessness that these experiences create. This cycle is a complex web of self-doubt, the desperate search for meaning, and an amplification of pre-existing internal conflicts that can leave individuals feeling more trapped than ever before. This pattern is not merely a consequence of a difficult situation. It's a deeply ingrained psychological response that further exacerbates feelings of helplessness and despair. The first step in breaking free from this cycle is understanding how it works and recognizing its different manifestations in your own life. Have you ever felt like you were being dragged down by a never-ending loop of negative thoughts and emotions? This is often how the vicious cycle of powerlessness begins. Prolonged exposure to Kafkaesque scenarios often erodes one's sense of self-worth and can plant deep seeds of self-doubt. When an individual is consistently confronted with illogical and frustrating systems, they might start questioning their own competence and even their sanity. It's as if the external chaos begins to seep into their internal world, creating a sense that they are somehow flawed or incapable. This internalization can manifest in self-blame and shame, where individuals start to believe that they are somehow responsible for the illogical situations they are facing. For instance, consider a person repeatedly encountering contradictory instructions in a work environment, leading them to question their own understanding and abilities. This self-doubt isn't just a fleeting thought, it's a deep-seated erosion of self-worth that is fueled by the Kafkaesque. This self-questioning creates a negative inner loop, where individuals become trapped in a cycle of self-criticism and feelings of inadequacy. This is how the feeling of being not good enough is created and amplified. The illogical nature of Kafkaesque situations creates a desperate need for control and meaning, which paradoxically makes individuals even more vulnerable. When the world around you seems chaotic, the need to understand and rationalize the situation becomes overwhelming, and when that cannot be achieved, frustration and despair can easily set in. This constant search for logical explanations in an illogical environment becomes a form of entrapment, as the individual tries to find rational answers to questions that have none. For example, someone endlessly trying to decipher the rules of an arbitrary bureaucratic process is essentially running in circles, as they are attempting to apply logic in a space where it simply doesn't exist. This desperate search for understanding not only proves futile, but also further amplifies feelings of frustration and powerlessness, as the systems simply do not provide any answers. The very act of seeking clarity in an illogical situation can become a trap in itself, deepening the sense of despair and hopelessness. These situations also have a tendency to amplify pre-existing internal conflicts and vulnerabilities, especially those that have been previously unaddressed. The Kafkaesque can act as a trigger, reactivating past traumas, insecurities, and fears that were previously dormant. These feelings are often projected onto the external world, which can lead to even more emotional turmoil. For example, someone with a past experience of being bullied or mistreated by authority figures might find that a difficult encounter with a bureaucracy will reactivate these past traumas, resulting in an overwhelming emotional reaction that is disproportionate to the current situation. The external chaos triggers an internal storm, intensifying pre-existing wounds and creating a more complex and overwhelming psychological experience, showing us how past unresolved issues can be retriggered by present situations. This projection highlights the intricate way the external world can mirror and amplify our internal states. Ultimately, the constant feeling of powerlessness leads to a cycle of avoidance and resignation. When faced with repeated illogical and frustrating experiences, individuals may stop trying to change the situation and become passive observers of their own lives. They might start to avoid situations that might trigger their negative emotions, thus limiting their life and increasing their feelings of isolation. This learned helplessness creates a pattern of disempowerment and hopelessness, where individuals no longer believe in their ability to influence their environment or their own lives. Consider a person who has internalized the belief that their actions will never make a difference and simply stops advocating for themselves, thus solidifying the feeling of being trapped. This isn't just a coping mechanism. It's a cycle of disempowerment that can lead to depression, anxiety, and a deep sense of resignation. How many times have you simply given up when you knew you should have kept trying? The Kafkaesque has that effect. This is how avoidance becomes an internal prison. Breaking free from this cycle requires a crucial shift in perspective, and that shift begins with self-awareness. This is not about denying the external challenges. It's about understanding how these challenges impact your internal state. Recognizing your internal triggers is the first step towards breaking free of these negative patterns and can create the space necessary for a different response. When you start to pay attention to how specific situations trigger deep emotional responses, you become aware of your own patterns, and you can then start to take steps to change your relationship to these difficult emotions. This self-awareness is not a passive exercise. It's an active process that involves conscious observation and a genuine willingness to understand your inner landscape. What specific circumstances make you feel trapped or powerless? Knowing this is the key to changing the pattern. Practical methods for identifying these triggers include journaling and mindfulness exercises. Journaling allows for a structured self-reflection where you can track recurring patterns and gain clarity on specific triggers. Mindfulness, on the other hand, involves observing your thoughts and emotions in the present moment, without judgment, and this type of observation can provide important insights about how your body responds to stressful situations. Through these practices, you can start to connect specific emotional responses to external triggers, allowing you to understand what it is exactly that is setting you off. For example, if you notice that you consistently feel anxious during a meeting with a certain person, you can start to explore why. This act of self-observation is not just an intellectual exercise. It's a practical step towards regaining your emotional agency, and knowing the why creates the space to act and change the pattern. In addition to recognizing your internal triggers, it's essential to deconstruct the illusion of the system itself. Many times the system is not as solid or unchangeable as it may first appear. It is, in many ways, an illusion created by our own perception, and understanding how this illusion is created is key to feeling less trapped. Understanding the constructed nature of a bureaucratic nightmare and how much of it exists only on paper can lessen its power over you. For instance, many of the rules and regulations that appear unchangeable can be questioned and can be challenged if one is aware that they are not as set in stone as one might think. A perfect example of this is to look for how much red tape is actually needed to achieve a specific outcome. When you see that the system only has power because you give it power, That's when you can begin to reclaim some of your own personal agency. Questioning the very structure of the system itself is an important step in reclaiming personal freedom. Furthermore, to deal with Kafkaesque situations, you must shift from a reactive mode to a more conscious and thoughtful response. Often, emotional reactions perpetuate feelings of powerlessness, while a more thoughtful response allows for the space to regain your agency. For example, when confronted with a frustrating email, instead of immediately reacting with anger or frustration, you can take a pause and reflect before responding. That pause can help you to choose a response that is based on intention and clarity, instead of one that's based on fear or anger. This shift is not about suppressing your emotions. It's about understanding them and making a choice about how you will react and how you will engage. This active choice is what helps you regain agency. A conscious response allows you to take a more active role in your life and to stop being a passive victim of circumstance. To support this internal shift, cultivating inner stability is essential. This doesn't mean avoiding difficult emotions, but rather learning to navigate them without losing one's sense of self. This means being able to remain grounded and centered in the middle of uncertainty. Think of it as an internal counterforce to the chaos of the outer world, and a way of being anchored in the present, regardless of what's happening around you. Practical tools such as mindfulness and meditation can help you to cultivate this inner stability, creating an internal refuge that can always be available to you. By training the mind to remain present and focused, you can create a sense of groundedness even when you're confronted with chaos. This inner stability is a powerful ally when navigating the unpredictability of Kafkaesque experiences. What small practices do you have that anchor you? The shift from self-awareness to action is where you begin to reclaim your agency in a tangible way. The key is to focus on what you can control instead of what is outside your sphere of influence. Obsessing about the illogical nature of a system only creates more frustration. Focusing on your responses, your boundaries, and your inner state is what empowers you and provides you with real leverage. This principle is not about ignoring the reality of the external situation. It's about channeling your energy toward areas where you can make a tangible impact. For instance, when dealing with a frustrating bureaucracy, instead of focusing on how illogical the process is, focus on documenting all the interactions and keeping a record of every detail, thereby focusing on what you can control and making it a tool of your own power. How can you apply this idea to a current problem in your life? Setting clear boundaries and knowing how to say no is a crucial way of protecting your emotional well-being in these types of scenarios. People often become trapped because they don't know how to assert their boundaries. That feeling of powerlessness can make it difficult to say no to unreasonable requests, which then perpetuates the negative loop of being trapped. If you know that you are in a Kafkaesque situation and you are being asked to do something that you are not comfortable with, it's essential to assert your personal boundaries. By saying no, you are not only protecting yourself, you are also sending a message to the system that you will not be manipulated. For example, if you're constantly being asked to do tasks that are outside of your job description, you might start saying no to these tasks, thus protecting your time, your energy, and your peace of mind. Setting boundaries is a powerful act of self-preservation and a clear indication that you are reclaiming your personal power. Seeking allies and building support networks is also essential to overcoming the feeling of isolation that often accompanies these situations. Finding like-minded people who understand the Kafkaesque experience and who can validate your feelings is vital for overcoming the feeling of isolation and to reduce the feeling of going insane. Sharing your experiences with others who understand the illogical nature of the situation can be incredibly validating and can make you feel much less alone. These connections offer a sense of belonging, support, and strength, and can counter the feelings of alienation and disorientation that are so common when dealing with these difficult scenarios. Where can you find your tribe of like-minded people? This sense of validation is key to personal well-being. Finally, creating small rituals of resistance can be a powerful way to counteract the chaos and absurdity of Kafkaesque experiences. These rituals are not meant to be grandiose. They are small, meaningful acts that can provide a sense of normalcy and agency. They can range from anything from creating a daily routine to documenting small victories against a system to making symbolic actions that help you regain a sense of inner freedom. These small acts send a message to yourself that you are in control and that you are an agent of change. Think of them as micro acts of rebellion that reinforce your sense of inner strength and purpose. How can you create your own rituals of resistance? These small but significant acts are a great way of asserting your personal power in a tangible way. The integration of theory and practice is the ultimate goal of this exploration of the Kafkaesque. Understanding the concept on an intellectual level is just the first step. The real transformation occurs when you begin to apply these ideas to your own life and personal experiences. Utilizing a Kafkaesque journal as a self-discovery tool can be a great way of tracking your emotions and of creating space for self-reflection. By recording recurring patterns, triggers, and coping mechanisms, you can gain valuable insights into the way the Kafkaesque manifests in your life. This integration of theory with your own personal experience solidifies your knowledge and creates a deeper understanding of yourself. What would the first entry on your Kafkaesque journal be? When you start to link your emotional responses to specific external triggers, you create a personalized roadmap for managing difficult emotions. This is a process of cause and effect that can reduce your feelings of powerlessness and increase your feelings of self-awareness. By tracking patterns and recognizing which triggers cause which reactions, you'll become much more conscious about how the world impacts your inner landscape and how to choose a new reaction, thereby stopping the passive and reactive loop. This connection is not about intellectual knowledge alone. It is about creating a direct link between your awareness and your personal experience. This is when change becomes possible. How will you begin tracking this pattern? Reframing your personal narrative about a Kafkaesque situation is key to regaining control over it and to move forward. By rewriting your story, you go from being a passive victim to becoming an active agent of change. Think of it as a way of reclaiming your story, where you highlight your own personal strengths and your capacity for resilience. By focusing on your own agency and on your ability to make positive changes, you can create a more empowering self-image and a more empowering personal narrative. What is the narrative that you are currently telling yourself about a difficult situation? Can you rewrite it so that you regain your power? Remember, you are the author of your own life. Finally, perhaps the most significant shift occurs when you begin to embrace the uncertainty and find meaning in the absurd. The Kafkaesque experience can also be an invitation to cultivate resilience and a sense of inner freedom, even when facing external challenges. This is not an invitation to accept injustice, but to find ways to thrive in spite of it, to not allow the illogical nature of the world to determine your inner state. When you begin to find meaning within chaos, you learn how to be adaptable and how to create an inner space that remains unshaken. How can you use this understanding to create an even more empowered version of yourself? Remember that this sense of personal agency is a great source of strength and resilience that can guide you through anything. Imagine for a moment that the very ground beneath your feet begins to shift, that what you once perceived as solid and true now seems unreliable and distorted. This feeling of unreality, where logic and reason appear to have no effect, is a core element of the Kafkaesque experience and a central feature of its psychological impact. One of the most disorienting aspects of this experience is the increasingly subjective nature of reality. In these situations, what you perceive is not necessarily what is true or real, thus challenging your understanding of the external world and even your own sanity. Have you ever tried to explain a situation that made perfect sense to you, but that was completely dismissed by the other party, making you question your own perception? This feeling of having your reality invalidated is an experience that creates profound emotional distress. As you try to apply reason to an environment that is inherently irrational, you might begin to doubt your own judgment and even question your sanity. This subjective distortion of reality is often amplified by a feeling of being gaslighted by the system. When the people in charge seem to deny your experience and invalidate your perceptions, you might start to distrust your own understanding of what's happening. This can be a very isolating experience, and it can create a deep sense of confusion and vulnerability. For example, think of a situation where you are being given contradictory instructions by a superior, and when you try to point this out, your concerns are dismissed or denied. This isn't just about being confused, it's about the very foundations of your reality being called into question, eroding trust not only in the system, but in your own perceptions. It is a deeply destabilizing experience. This is why a Kafkaesque situation feels like an illogical nightmare, and it undermines your ability to feel safe and secure in your own experience of reality. Adding to this disorientation is the disconnect between action and outcome. In a Kafkaesque environment, your efforts often seem meaningless, as your actions no longer produce the results you would expect. Imagine trying to solve a problem, using all the logical steps you know, only to have your attempts consistently thwarted or ignored. This can create a profound sense of frustration and a feeling of futility, and it erodes your sense of agency. In these situations, you can do everything right, according to the rules, and still get nowhere, because the system itself is fundamentally irrational. This highlights the arbitrary nature of the Kafkaesque and underscores its psychological impact. This experience is not just about not achieving your goals, it's about feeling that your efforts themselves have no value. This profound disconnect undermines the basic human need for efficacy, and it can lead to a deep feeling of despair and hopelessness. This irrational disconnect often leads to the creation of a double bind, where you are punished for both following and not following the rules. This creates a sense of being trapped in a no-win situation. These contradictory demands create a constant state of anxiety and unease, where every choice you make leads to a negative outcome. For instance, if you're in a workplace where you're told to be creative and innovative, but you're also penalized for making mistakes or taking risks, you are placed in a double bind. This feeling of being constantly punished, no matter what you do, significantly increases the sense of powerlessness and hopelessness. It's a situation where any action you take leads to a dead end, making you feel like you're constantly hitting an invisible wall. It creates a cycle of frustration and anxiety that only increases the feeling of being trapped. Adding to this confusion is the way that Kafkaesque situations often disrupt your sense of time. The cyclical and repetitive nature of these systems makes time feel meaningless, as days blur into weeks with no real progress or resolution. The feeling of being stuck in an endless loop creates a deep sense of disorientation, as you no longer have a sense of where you are or where you're going. The Kafkaesque experience makes you feel like you're trapped in a timeless void, with no beginning and no end. For example, imagine a situation where you are constantly filling out the same forms, submitting the same requests, and having the same conversations, only to end up exactly where you started. This endless cycle can create a very disorienting feeling, as the normal rhythms of life are disrupted. Time loses its structure, and you are left with the feeling of being trapped outside of the normal flow of life. The erosion of agency in these scenarios is a gradual process that begins when you start internalizing the system's illogical logic. Prolonged exposure to Kafkaesque environments can lead to a subtle shift in your own belief system, as you start to accept the irrational rules as normal. You might even start to see your own worth through the lens of this illogical system, which further erodes your self-esteem. For example, when you are constantly told you are not good enough by a bureaucratic system, you might start to believe it, even when it is not true. This internalization of negative messaging can be extremely damaging and can lead to a deep sense of self-doubt and worthlessness. The system's logic becomes your own inner critic, further eroding your sense of self and personal agency. You begin to blame yourself for situations that are not your fault, solidifying the feeling that you are the problem and that you are deserving of this negative experience. Adding to this feeling of powerlessness is the subtle loss of autonomy. The loss of agency in a Kafkaesque situation is not always an overt, but a gradual process that erodes your ability to make decisions and exert influence over your life. Often, it is a series of small compromises, small concessions, and the feeling of not having a choice that gradually leads to the belief that you have no agency at all. For example, a worker who is repeatedly asked to compromise their values might start to give up on their integrity, which then leads to a feeling that they are not in charge of their own life. This type of subtle erosion of autonomy creates a state of passivity and compliance, making you less likely to stand up for yourself. It is a process of slow relinquishment of your personal power, which can eventually lead to a sense of resignation and despair, and a feeling of being totally trapped. This erosion of agency is closely linked to the psychological concept of learned helplessness. This pattern is created when you are repeatedly subjected to situations where your actions have no impact on the outcome. In a Kafkaesque environment, this is very common and creates a feeling of total powerlessness. When you repeatedly try to change something and you are consistently met with frustration, you might eventually stop trying, even when opportunities for change become available. This learned helplessness, then, is a dangerous cycle that can cause you to give up and believe that you cannot influence your environment. For example, an individual who has tried multiple times to fix an illogical problem might eventually stop trying altogether because they have learned that their actions are futile, thus solidifying this feeling of helplessness. It's a dangerous pattern that undermines your sense of self-efficacy. Perhaps the most insidious aspect of the Kafkaesque experience is the way that it can lead to passive compliance. Passively accepting a dysfunctional system reinforces its power and allows the erosion of agency to continue. When you become compliant in the face of illogical rules, you are not only harming yourself, you are also reinforcing a system that perpetuates the feeling of powerlessness. Consider a situation where you are being asked to do something unethical, and you comply because you feel that you have no other choice. This act of compliance not only compromises your values, but it also sends a message that you will not stand up for yourself, and it reinforces your feeling of being trapped by further eroding your sense of agency. What small compromises have you made that have led to a sense of personal powerlessness? Reclaiming inner space in the middle of a Kafkaesque experience, then, begins with using mindfulness as a powerful grounding tool. By observing your thoughts and emotions without becoming overwhelmed by them, you can create a sense of detachment from the chaotic situation. This detachment allows you to gain a clearer perspective and to respond with more intention. Think of it as creating a space between yourself and the chaos, where you can observe what's happening without being swept away by it. A simple mindfulness exercise, such as focusing on your breath or paying attention to your physical sensations, can be used daily to create inner space and stability, and to create a sense of calm and control despite the outer chaos. This mindful awareness is a powerful counterforce to the feelings of panic and confusion that can easily arise in Kafkaesque situations. This daily practice helps you return to yourself. Another key element to reclaiming inner space is to identify and challenge the negative self-talk that often accompanies these situations. Reframing these negative thoughts can help to reclaim a sense of self-worth and to regain control over your inner dialogue. When you are faced with an illogical situation, you might start to tell yourself that you are not good enough, that you are somehow flawed, or that you are the cause of the problem. Recognizing these negative thought patterns and then replacing them with more positive and empowering ones can significantly change the emotional impact of the situation. It is a process of actively rewriting your inner narrative. You might, for instance, replace a thought such as, "I'm a failure because I can't understand this system," with a thought like, "This system is illogical, and it's not a reflection of my ability." This type of reframing helps you regain your sense of worth and empowers you to take a more active role in managing your own inner state. Focusing on your personal values and setting clear intentions is another powerful way to navigate Kafkaesque situations with more clarity and purpose. When you align your actions with your values, you can create a sense of meaning and direction, even when the world around you feels chaotic. This internal compass can guide your choices, regardless of the circumstances. For example, if your core value is integrity, you can set the intention to act ethically, even when faced with unethical demands. Setting small intention-driven goals can create a sense of progress and movement, even when it seems like nothing is changing in the external environment, and this can bring a sense of purpose and meaning to the experience, making it much easier to navigate. Finally, creating small acts of rebellion against the illogical nature of the system can empower you to reclaim a sense of agency. These acts of rebellion don't need to be radical or dramatic. They can be as small as changing your routine, or choosing to wear a certain color of clothes, or keeping a detailed record of every interaction. What's important is that these small actions create a feeling of being in control, even when feeling powerless. These small acts of defiance create a sense of positive resistance against the absurdity and help you regain a feeling of personal power. These micro acts of rebellion are a great way to reassert your agency in a tangible way and reclaim a sense of inner freedom. This journey from feeling like a victim to becoming an agent of change is entirely possible, and it is what this exploration is all about. Understanding the Kafkaesque experience allows you to move beyond feeling trapped by it and to reclaim personal power by shifting your focus to your inner world and taking practical steps to create stability and purpose. When you choose to become more self-aware, you begin to realize that you are not simply at the mercy of the external world. You have the capacity to shape your own experience and to create a sense of inner freedom, even in the midst of external chaos. How does this idea of moving from victim to agent resonate with you? The ability to embrace paradox and to find meaning in contradictions is another key element of reclaiming your inner power. When you begin to accept that life is not always logical or linear, it frees you from the need to find rational explanations for irrational situations. This acceptance allows you to find a deeper understanding of yourself and to be more at peace with the world around you. Accepting life's contradictions provides a space for inner freedom. Consider someone who has learned to find peace in the midst of a chaotic environment and how this acceptance has freed them from the need to understand and control every aspect of the experience. This is how true agency is restored. Ultimately, the power of conscious choice in an illogical world is what matters the most. Even in a Kafkaesque situation, you always have the freedom to choose how you will respond. This inner freedom is always available to everyone, regardless of their external circumstances. True power is not found in controlling the external environment, but in controlling your responses. By making a conscious choice to act with intention and purpose, you can maintain your integrity and agency, even when facing extreme adversity. How can you apply this idea to a situation you are currently dealing with? Remember, you always have the choice of how you will respond to every single situation. By understanding the Kafkaesque experience, you can discover an inner freedom that transcends external reality. This inner freedom is found by accepting the absurdity of life, by taking responsibility for your own responses, and by cultivating a sense of inner space, no matter how chaotic the external world may seem. This is where true liberation lies. In your ability to navigate these challenging situations with resilience, self-awareness, and grace. This inner freedom empowers you to navigate life's challenges with more courage and wisdom. And perhaps more importantly, it transforms you into the author of your own experience. But to fully understand the transformative power of this understanding, we must go one step further. The feeling of being trapped in an illogical nightmare, which we have been exploring, is not a one-time occurrence, but rather a self-reinforcing cycle, where the experience of powerlessness leads to more powerlessness, and where the inherent illogic of the system only creates more frustration. The more an individual feels trapped, the more they reinforce the patterns that created that initial feeling, thus creating a repetitive loop that seems almost impossible to break free from. Think of a situation where you are dealing with an unresponsive bureaucracy. You might try different approaches, but if every approach is met with the same indifference, you might start to feel like you are going in circles, and that you are trapped in a cycle that you cannot escape. This feeling of being caught in a repeating loop is a core component of the Kafkaesque experience, and it's crucial to understand how this pattern reinforces the feeling of helplessness, and why a different approach is needed to break free from it. Why do you think that so many people feel stuck in the same patterns without being able to create meaningful change? Adding to this feeling of being trapped is the vicious circle of seeking external validation. Individuals caught in a Kafkaesque cycle, in an attempt to resolve their internal feelings of inadequacy, often seek approval from the very systems that are causing them distress. By seeking external validation from the source of their pain, they are creating a deeper dependency on external factors, therefore reinforcing the feeling that they are not in control. Consider someone who is in a toxic work environment. They might try to get the approval of their superiors by doing everything right, according to the rules, even when those rules are illogical or unfair. However, this only perpetuates the cycle, because it creates a deeper dependency on the system that is causing them distress. This reliance on external validation solidifies the feeling of powerlessness, and it shows how the solution must come from within and not from an outside source. How can you change your approach when the very thing you seek approval from is the thing that is causing you pain? As individuals remain trapped in these Kafkaesque situations, they eventually start to internalize the absurdity of their surroundings, and this can erode their capacity for hope and joy. Constant exposure to illogical systems can lead to a sense of cynicism and hopelessness, and these feelings can then become internalized, creating an inner world that reflects the negative external one. Think of someone who has been dealing with an illogical bureaucracy for a long time. They might start to see the world as a meaningless and chaotic place, and this perspective then diminishes their capacity for optimism. This internalization of absurdity is a dangerous process, because it makes it more difficult to see a pathway to positive change, because the inner world has now been colored by the negativity of the external world, creating a need for a fundamental shift that begins internally. What type of changes are required to shift an inner state and overcome cynicism? This internalization of the absurd also creates a deep dissonance between an individual's inner and outer reality, making it even harder to find clarity and inner peace. The individual might start to feel that their inner world is not congruent with the external world, and this lack of congruence further exacerbates the feeling of disorientation and confusion. Consider a situation where you are experiencing something that feels completely illogical and unfair, and you feel like no one else understands what you are going through. This feeling of being outside of reality creates a sense of isolation, and it makes it more difficult to understand one's own emotions. This dissociation between inner and outer reality is a core element of the Kafkaesque experience, and it highlights the subjective nature of reality and the need for a new approach to resolve this inner conflict. How can you reclaim a sense of inner peace when your inner world feels completely disconnected from your outer experience? The key to moving out of this cycle lies in the realization that the way one interprets the Kafkaesque experience has a direct impact on one's response, and that the same experience can be interpreted in vastly different ways. Your perception of an event is what creates your reality, and by shifting your interpretation of the experience, you can begin to shift your own feelings and move towards a more empowered state. Think of two people who are dealing with the same bureaucratic problem. One might see it as an insurmountable obstacle, while the other might see it as a puzzle to be solved. These two different approaches highlight how perception shapes experience and how shifting your internal lens can change the entire experience. How can you change your interpretation to alter the outcome? The Kafkaesque experience often creates the illusion of a fixed, unchangeable reality, and by challenging this assumption, one can begin to reclaim their agency. We often tend to see systems as rigid and unchangeable structures, and by challenging this perception, we create space for personal empowerment and therefore create new possibilities. Think of an individual who has always believed that they are powerless against an unfair system, and then they have an epiphany that they do have a choice, and that their own choices can change the entire outcome. This type of perspective shift is key to breaking free from the illusion of a fixed reality and to reclaiming personal agency. How can you challenge your beliefs to see a new perspective, focusing on how one relates to a situation rather than on what is happening, allows one to disengage from the cycle of powerlessness. By taking responsibility for one's reactions and choosing a thoughtful response over a purely emotional one is able to begin to reclaim agency. Think of someone who is facing a difficult situation and they decide that instead of reacting with anger, they will respond with a sense of calm and clear-mindedness. This type of shift in focus allows the individual to stop seeing themselves as passive victims of an external situation and to start to see themselves as active agents of their own experience. This ability to choose your own response is a fundamental element of reclaiming your power. Are you choosing your responses, or are you simply reacting? Furthermore, by reevaluating one's personal narrative, one can rewrite their story to empower themselves, instead of seeing themselves as victims of an external situation. The way we tell our story creates our emotional experience, and by actively reframing that narrative, we can create different responses and feel more empowered. Consider someone who has always seen themselves as a victim of a difficult past, and then they decide to reframe their narrative and start to see themselves as a survivor who has overcome many challenges. This type of shift can completely change their emotional experience and empower them to make different choices in the present. How can you rewrite your story to empower your own sense of self? To practically apply these ideas to create real change, it is crucial to create islands of clarity within the chaos. This is not about creating perfect order, but rather about finding small, manageable ways to bring a sense of calm into your daily life. This can include creating daily routines, or establishing clear boundaries, or creating small practices that bring a feeling of groundedness. Think of someone who is dealing with a chaotic work environment, and they choose to create a consistent morning routine that includes meditation and journaling. This small space of calm creates a sense of stability in the middle of chaos and positively affects their emotional state. What small practices can you create to bring more calm and stability to your life? In addition to these practices, one must learn to manage the difficult emotions that arise during a Kafkaesque experience. These feelings are unavoidable, but one's reaction to them can change and become more intentional. Mindfulness can be used to observe these feelings without becoming overwhelmed, and thought reframing can be used to create a different emotional outcome. Consider a situation where you feel anger rising. Instead of reacting to it, you can choose to observe it with curiosity, and then reframe the thought that is creating that anger to create a different outcome. This allows you to become more proactive and less reactive, and it allows you to move through difficult situations with a sense of calm and control. How can you change your response to difficult emotions to create a different result? Furthermore, the need for meaningful connections with others who understand the Kafkaesque experience is key to overcoming the feeling of isolation. Sharing one's story and validating one's experiences with others creates a sense of belonging, and it counteracts the feeling of going insane. This could involve creating a support network, finding online communities, or joining support groups where people can find validation and encouragement. Think of someone who has been feeling very isolated by an experience, and then they find a group of people who have had similar experiences, and this sense of shared understanding creates a powerful feeling of relief and belonging. These connections can diminish the feelings of isolation and make you feel more supported during challenging times. Who do you know that shares your perspective? Finally, small acts of resistance against the illogical nature of the system can empower the individual and create a sense of agency. These acts don't have to be overtly rebellious, but they can be small ways of expressing individuality and of refusing to become a passive victim. This could involve changing how one interacts with bureaucratic systems, using humor to diffuse tension, or even keeping a detailed record of every interaction. Consider someone who decides to start addressing their superiors in a completely new way, with humor and playfulness, and how this small act of resistance changes the entire dynamic. These small acts of defiance can create a sense of personal power and remind you of your own inner strength, even in the face of extreme adversity. What small acts of resistance can you implement today? The Kafkaesque experience is not just an external phenomenon, but a reflection of one's internal psychological state, and therefore a personal experience that can be reframed and changed. Understanding this duality is key to breaking free from the feeling of powerlessness and solidifies the main points that have been discussed in this video. The power to change one's experience resides within one's own interpretations and responses, and the more that you understand this, the more empowered you will become. But how exactly does this understanding allow one to create a long-lasting change? The transformative power of self-awareness is a powerful tool for navigating Kafkaesque situations, and this self-awareness is key to breaking the cycle of powerlessness. The information provided in this video is not just theoretical, but a practical guide for reclaiming agency and for creating a more fulfilling life. The more self-aware you become, the more empowered you will feel in your ability to handle difficult situations and to create positive change in your life. But what type of changes are possible once we integrate this deeper knowledge? Confronting Kafkaesque situations is not just about surviving, but about creating an opportunity for personal growth and to transform negative experiences into a positive pathway for self-development. These situations, although negative, can be used as catalysts for change and for developing a more empowered sense of self. These challenging experiences can also be used as ways to develop resilience and inner strength and to create positive changes in our lives. What future growth is possible from these experiences? The next steps in this exploration will synthesize all of the information discussed and will offer a clear path forward. These final revelations will offer a powerful method for creating lasting changes by integrating one's understanding with one's intention, and will give the viewer a clear roadmap for moving forward and for finding inner peace. What type of revelations can you expect, and what will you be doing with this information? The path to breaking free from the cyclical nature of the Kafkaesque, as we have explored, begins with a fundamental shift in perspective, and the realization that much of the anxiety associated with it stems from the illusion of external control. We often fall into the trap of believing that if we could only control all of the variables in our external world, then everything would be okay, and that we would be free of the feeling of powerlessness. This belief, however, is the very thing that keeps us trapped, and it perpetuates a constant cycle of trying to fix the outside world instead of focusing on our inner responses. The harder we try to control external circumstances, the more out of control we tend to feel, because the more we try to control the external world, the more we become aware of its chaotic nature. Think of a person who is constantly trying to micromanage their work environment. They might try to control every detail and make sure that everything is perfect. But this only leads to more stress and frustration because they are trying to control something that is ultimately beyond their control. This constant striving for external control is a significant source of anxiety, and it blinds us to the fact that true agency lies not in the control of the outside world, but in one's internal responses. How can you release the need for external control and embrace the power of inner sovereignty? The key to breaking free from the Kafkaesque cycle, then, lies in shifting our focus from external control to inner sovereignty, and that by reclaiming this inner sovereignty, we begin to reclaim true agency. This is not about denying that there are external challenges and difficult circumstances, but it is about acknowledging them without giving them the power to dictate our inner state. True agency lies in our ability to manage our internal responses and to consciously choose how we engage with difficult situations instead of being a passive reactor to them. Imagine a person who faces constant criticism from their superiors. Instead of reacting with anger or frustration, they choose to maintain their composure and to respond with clarity and calm. This conscious choice of response highlights the power of inner control and demonstrates how we can maintain our inner stability even when facing chaotic external circumstances. This shift in focus is essential for navigating the Kafkaesque because it gives us the power to choose how external events will affect us, and it allows us to stop being passive victims and to become active participants in our own lives. How can you become the sovereign of your own inner world? One of the most powerful tools for cultivating this inner sovereignty is the development of what we can call the observer self, which is the ability to create a sense of emotional detachment by observing one's own feelings without being overwhelmed by them. By cultivating the capacity to observe one's emotions without being completely consumed by them, we create inner space and we reclaim our personal agency during Kafkaesque experiences. This observer self allows us to see our feelings as temporary experiences and not as permanent states of being, which allows us to make better choices and to not be driven by purely emotional reactions. For example, think of someone using mindfulness to step back from an overwhelming emotional experience. Instead of reacting automatically, they are able to observe the feeling with curiosity and to respond more thoughtfully and intentionally. This act of stepping back creates the necessary space to reclaim one's agency and allows one to break free from the cycle of powerlessness. What techniques can you use to cultivate the observer within? The power of choice, even in situations where one feels powerless, cannot be overstated. It is this conscious act of choosing that allows one to reclaim personal authority and to stop seeing oneself as a victim of circumstance. Even when the options appear to be limited, the act of making a choice reinforces that the individual is not a passive reactor, but rather an active participant in their own experience, and that this act of participating can change the entire emotional outcome. Consider a person who feels trapped in an unfair work environment. They may not be able to change the situation immediately, but they can choose to set clear boundaries, to limit their exposure to toxic elements, and to focus on their inner well-being. These seemingly small choices can create a significant shift in their experience, and they powerfully reinforce their personal agency, even when facing overwhelming external adversity. How can you start making conscious choices in situations where you feel powerless? In addition to the power of choice, we can also actively transform our Kafkaesque experiences by developing actionable strategies that are designed to change one's inner state. This begins by identifying and reframing the negative thought patterns that often reinforce the feeling of powerlessness and entrapment. These negative self-talk patterns can solidify the idea that we are trapped in a hopeless situation, and the more we reinforce these thoughts, the more real they seem. However, by recognizing these patterns, we can challenge them and create different inner narratives which directly impacts our emotional outcome. For example, if you often find yourself saying, "I am always unlucky," then you can challenge this thought by looking at past experiences where you were, in fact, quite fortunate, or by looking for ways to make your own luck. These small acts of reframing can change the entire emotional landscape and pave the way for a more empowered perspective. What negative thoughts do you tend to repeat, and how can you reframe them? Another important aspect in transforming these experiences is the development of resilience through acceptance, which means fully embracing the whole spectrum of human emotions instead of trying to avoid them or suppress them. Trying to control or suppress difficult emotions, such as anger or frustration, only amplifies their power, and it can create a sense of inner turmoil. However, by fully accepting these feelings, we diminish their power over us, and we create space for more positive emotional states. Consider the experience of feeling overwhelmed. Instead of resisting this emotion, one can choose to fully embrace it, to feel it, and to understand what it has to teach them. This acceptance of vulnerability creates more inner space for positive change, because the initial resistance is no longer consuming all of the individual's energy. How can you accept difficult emotions and use them to empower yourself? To support the creation of this inner space, setting meaningful goals and clear intentions can also provide a powerful sense of direction, especially when surrounded by chaos and uncertainty. Focusing on what one values and what one considers important can create an inner compass that helps the individual navigate the Kafkaesque experience with a sense of purpose and clarity. For example, if you feel overwhelmed by a meaningless job, you can create clear intentions for your personal life that align with your values, and these intentions will provide you with an inner space of meaning and focus. This can include setting a goal of spending more time with your family or starting a creative project that inspires you. These intentions help you create a sense of purpose, even when the outside world seems meaningless, and guide you towards personal empowerment. What values can you use to guide your life, even when your environment seems meaningless? Finally, cultivating self-compassion and practicing inner kindness is absolutely essential for navigating the Kafkaesque experience. Often, when facing difficult challenges, we can tend to be overly critical of ourselves, and this self-criticism only intensifies the feeling of powerlessness, because it reinforces the idea that we are not good enough. By practicing self-compassion, we reduce the feeling of self-doubt, and we increase our capacity for resilience, because we start to acknowledge that we are doing our best in the circumstances. Consider a person who has made a mistake. Instead of beating themselves up about it, they can choose to treat themselves with the same kindness that they would offer to a friend. This act of self-compassion creates a more positive self-image, and it allows one to approach difficult situations with more courage and confidence. How can you cultivate more kindness towards yourself? The path towards reclaiming agency and transforming the Kafkaesque experience requires not only the implementation of new strategies, but also a deep process of integration and transcendence. This process often involves confronting and integrating what Carl Jung called the shadow, which are the parts of ourselves that we often reject or deny. The shadow is often projected onto the external world and is very present during a Kafkaesque situation. The more that we reject these shadow aspects, the more we become controlled by them and the less authentic we become. Think of a person who has a strong shadow aspect of anger. Instead of acknowledging it, they might try to suppress it, but this only leads to them being more controlled by it and lashing out at inappropriate moments. By accepting and integrating the shadow, we become a more complete version of ourselves, and we are no longer controlled by our unconscious patterns. How can you integrate your shadow aspects to create a more whole version of yourself? Another key element in transforming the Kafkaesque experience is the active transmutation of negative energy into positive action. Instead of being overwhelmed by the negative emotions that arise from these situations, we can choose to use them as fuel for positive change. By changing our perspective and seeing negative experiences as opportunities for personal growth and transformation, we can harness their energy to create something meaningful and constructive. For example, instead of being defeated by an unjust situation, you can use the anger and frustration you experienced to create positive changes in your life or to fight against injustice in your community. By choosing to transform pain into power, we create positive transformations, and we move from being victims of circumstances into active agents of change. How can you start transmuting negative energy into positive action? To help us understand this process of integration, we can use the symbol of the mandorla, which represents the reconciliation of opposites. The mandorla is formed by the overlapping of two circles, and it visually represents the union of opposing forces. In the context of the Kafkaesque, the mandorla reminds us that even in the midst of chaos and contradiction, there is a possibility for finding wholeness and harmony. For instance, the Kafkaesque highlights the duality between order and chaos, control and helplessness, and logic and illogic. And the mandorla reminds us that both of these forces are necessary for creating a whole and complete experience. By embracing these paradoxical elements and seeing them as a necessary part of the whole, we can find a deeper sense of inner peace, even when surrounded by external turmoil. How can you use the symbol of the mandorla to embrace your own internal contradictions? Ultimately, understanding the Kafkaesque is not just about finding practical solutions, but about transcending the limits of external reality and discovering a deeper sense of inner freedom and peace. True freedom is not about controlling external circumstances, but about liberating oneself from the emotional hold that those circumstances might have. This inner freedom is always available to us, regardless of the outer world, and it represents the possibility of finding peace in any type of situation. By embracing uncertainty, accepting difficult emotions, and aligning with our values, we create an inner space that is not limited by the external world. What actions can you take to transcend the limits of your external circumstances? The Kafkaesque experience, as we have seen, is not just an external reality, but a profound reflection of one's internal psychological state, and therefore it represents a duality that is essential for understanding the entire phenomenon. It is not just about what is happening to us, but also about how we are interpreting and reacting to it. By understanding this duality, we begin the process of transforming our experience, and we are able to see our personal narrative with new eyes. This synthesis of all of the information discussed creates a practical guide for reclaiming personal power and for creating a more fulfilling life. What insights have you gained about the duality of your own Kafkaesque experiences? In closing, we are invited to question the very nature of reality and our perception of it. The Kafkaesque situations offer us a unique opportunity to see through the illusions of the world and to develop a deeper understanding of our own internal landscape. This questioning can lead to profound shifts in our emotional state, and it empowers us to stop being passive observers and to become active participants in our lives. Because, by questioning the validity of the commonly accepted norms, we create space for personal growth and transformation. What common beliefs are you now questioning, and how will that change your actions? Reclaiming personal agency and creating a life that is aligned with our values and intentions is not an easy process, but it is a possible one. Personal meaning is not something that can be found in the external world, but it is created by how we choose to respond to difficult situations, and that the power to find meaning lies within us. Understanding the patterns of the Kafkaesque is key to creating a life that is both meaningful and fulfilling, and a life where we are no longer victims of circumstance, but rather masters of our destiny and conscious creators of our own reality. How will you use this understanding to reclaim agency and create meaning? And so, the final revelation is this: true freedom is found within, and this inner freedom transcends all external circumstances. This is not just a philosophical concept, but a real experience that is available to everyone if they so choose to embrace it. By understanding the Kafkaesque, we can liberate ourselves from the emotional grip of external events and create a space of inner peace that is not dependent on what might be happening outside. This inner freedom is the ultimate goal, and it represents the possibility of creating a fulfilling life, even in the midst of difficult and illogical circumstances. What will your inner freedom look like, and how will you cultivate it? The journey into the heart of the Kafkaesque now culminates with the profound realization that it is far more than a mere literary invention. It is a vivid reflection of the psychological labyrinth within us. It is not just about the bizarre scenarios and the nonsensical bureaucracies that Kafka so masterfully depicted, but rather about the very real emotional and psychological impact that these experiences have on the individual. The feeling of powerlessness, the absurd sense of alienation, and the disorientation that comes from navigating illogical systems are not simply external stressors, but rather they are deeply embedded within the core of one's personal experience. Think of a person who initially perceives their troubles as a series of external, random misfortunes, and then begins to understand that their own internal feelings are a key part of that experience. And by acknowledging these difficult emotions, they begin to understand the external situations from a new perspective. This realization is key to transforming the entire process of personal agency, as one realizes that they are not merely passive victims of reality, but key players in shaping their personal emotional landscape, therefore turning any experience into an opportunity for personal growth. How has your perspective of your own experience changed during this process of exploration? The pattern we have seen throughout this exploration that external, Kafkaesque, systems so often reflect inner states of confusion, powerlessness, and alienation is a powerful key to unlocking a more empowering perspective. It is by recognizing that the external chaos often mirrors an internal chaos that we start to grasp the full magnitude of our personal agency, which is so often eroded by the feeling of being overwhelmed. This is not merely an abstract theory, but a practical tool that allows us to bridge the gap between our inner experiences and the external world. This understanding shifts the focus from external control to internal resilience, therefore offering a path to reclaim personal power. When you recognize how your internal state is influencing your view of external circumstances, you begin to realize that you are not trapped, but rather that you have the power to change the entire outcome by changing your perspective. What patterns can you now see in your life that you were previously unaware of? This understanding that acknowledging and managing these difficult feelings is key to better mental well-being is perhaps one of the most important insights we can draw from our study of the Kafkaesque. To ignore these experiences, to try and suppress them, or to see them as unimportant, only perpetuates a cycle of despair and learned helplessness. However, by choosing to actively engage with these emotions, by taking responsibility for our inner emotional landscapes, and by finding strategies to transform those emotions, we reclaim personal power. Think of someone who previously felt completely powerless and then began to take action by understanding the origins of these difficult feelings and by learning new strategies to process them. This shift in awareness is what allows one to transform their experience and to move from feeling powerless to feeling empowered, therefore becoming the author of one's own life. How are you now engaging with feelings that you might have previously suppressed? And so, in understanding the Kafkaesque, we are ultimately invited to question not only our external reality, but also our perception of that reality, our place within it, and the very definition of our personal agency. The Kafkaesque reveals that our experience is not a fixed and unchangeable event, but rather an invitation to transform our perspective, to find opportunities for growth, and to define our agency from within. Instead of being passive victims of reality, we are given the chance to question its very nature, to become active creators of our experience, and to create lives that are aligned with our values, instead of being dictated by our circumstances. What external circumstances are you ready to question, and how can you start? In the broader context of human experience, the Kafkaesque is not an isolated phenomenon, but a shared human struggle that connects people across time and cultures. The themes of powerlessness and alienation resonate deeply within many historical periods and various social systems, and are not confined to our modern era. Consider, for instance, the stories of marginalized groups throughout history, or the narratives of individuals caught in the gears of oppressive regimes. These situations vividly reflect similar Kafkaesque dynamics. By acknowledging the universality of these struggles, we begin to realize that we are not alone in these experiences, and that many people throughout history have faced similar challenges. This awareness can create a sense of shared humanity, which in turn can reduce feelings of isolation and can foster a more empathetic worldview. What other situations from either history or from current events reflect Kafkaesque dynamics? The patterns that we have identified, the patterns of powerlessness, of absurdity, and of alienation, are not random, but rather they are reflections of deeper aspects of human psychology. And when we understand that, we can use these patterns as a roadmap for personal growth and for self-discovery. By recognizing these patterns in one's personal life, we begin to break free from negative cycles and reclaim agency over one's personal narrative. Think of a person who repeatedly felt powerless in their work life, but then recognized this as a recurring pattern, and then used that new awareness to change their approach and to finally reclaim their sense of personal agency. This is how patterns can provide a way forward, by revealing areas for personal growth and transformation, while also empowering the individual to break free from negative cycles. How can you start using patterns you have identified as a path towards positive change? The implications of truly understanding the Kafkaesque go beyond individual well-being and extend into the realm of social awareness. By becoming aware of these dynamics, we not only improve our personal lives, but we also contribute to creating a more compassionate and just world. The more we understand the patterns of powerlessness and how they affect the human psyche, the more we can work towards creating social structures that are designed to support human flourishing, rather than to create suffering. Think of an activist who, after recognizing these patterns in their own life, is inspired to advocate for changes in their workplace or community, thereby creating a positive impact beyond their personal sphere. How can you start using your new awareness to create a more compassionate world? Ultimately, this understanding transforms the Kafkaesque from what might initially appear to be a purely negative experience into a potent catalyst for personal growth, resilience, and self-awareness. These difficult experiences are not simply obstacles, but also transformative opportunities to create more authentic lives. Think of a person who, by recognizing these patterns, was able to change their emotional responses, create healthier boundaries, and live a more empowered and fulfilling life. This demonstrates that knowledge can lead to lasting change, as it allows one to move from feeling victimized to being a conscious creator of one's own experience, thus finally embracing their authentic selves. How can you use this new understanding to embrace your authentic self? All of the threads that we have explored throughout this video now converge to provide a more complete understanding of the Kafkaesque and its impact on our lives. All of the questions that we have raised have now been answered, and all of the key concepts have been thoroughly examined, with the goal of creating a unified and cohesive conclusion. And so, as the journey comes to a close, we see how all of the pieces now fit together, and that the Kafkaesque is a phenomenon that is both deeply personal and universal. This exploration has hopefully provided you with new tools for navigating complex experiences and a new understanding of your internal emotional state. How has your overall understanding of the Kafkaesque evolved throughout this video? The pattern of empowerment through knowledge is now fulfilled, because we have explored many tools that can be used to navigate Kafkaesque situations. And this knowledge is both theoretical and actionable, meaning that it can be practically applied in one's everyday life. The tools that have been shared throughout this exploration are the key to breaking free from cycles of powerlessness and alienation, and these strategies will allow you to take positive action and transform your experience. Think of how you can now use the information you have learned to create positive change in your life, and to move from being a passive observer of events into becoming an active participant. How can you start turning this knowledge into action? The initial question, which might have been, why do these experiences feel so familiar, is now resolved, because we have seen how these feelings are reflections of universal human struggles with power, meaning, and control. The initial setup of the video has now been linked with the final results, and this journey has helped to identify key psychological patterns that were previously hidden from view. We now understand that what might have initially seemed like a confusing and isolated experience is actually a part of a larger pattern that is present in many cultures and in many historical periods, and that this realization can help you feel more connected to the broader human experience. How has this information changed the way you see the world? Finally, the tension that has been built throughout this exploration can now be released with a sense of hope and empowerment, and with a renewed understanding that you are not alone in your experience, and that transformation is indeed possible. We have seen that self-awareness is a potent catalyst for change, and that by embracing our power of choice, we can create new emotional landscapes, no matter the difficult circumstances we might be facing. And so, with a message of encouragement, you are now invited to take the knowledge that was shared with you and to create meaningful changes, both in your own personal life and in the world around you. How can you take the insights that you have gained and use them to create positive changes? New questions now arise for further exploration, such as, how can these concepts be applied to different social and cultural contexts? And how might systems be transformed to be more human-centered and less Kafkaesque? You are now invited to continue this journey and to use the Kafkaesque lens for understanding both your internal world and the external one, and to continue exploring the many facets of this complex concept. This exploration can become an opportunity to deepen your understanding of the human condition and to see the world from a new perspective. What are some new areas you are now inspired to explore? This understanding also has profound implications for personal growth and for creating a more empathetic society, as understanding these patterns is not just about individual progress, but about creating a more harmonious world. You are now invited to apply the lessons you have learned to your relationships, your communities, and to the social structures in which you participate to transform your world through your new insights. This process can include challenging unjust systems, speaking up for marginalized groups, and creating opportunities for personal transformation for both yourself and for the people around you. What are some of the broader social implications of understanding the Kafkaesque? As you embark on this journey of transformation, you are now encouraged to start a Kafka journal, to track situations that evoke the feelings of absurdity, powerlessness, and alienation. This journal can become a tool for understanding how the Kafkaesque manifests in your life, and for discovering personal strategies for coping with these situations. In this journal, you can also start to apply all of the tools and insights that have been shared throughout this exploration. You are also encouraged to explore the Kafkaesque in other works that have had a profound effect on you, and to continue doing your own research and to deepen your understanding of this important topic. What is one action you can take right now to continue your journey of exploration? And so, you are now invited to share your experiences and to participate in discussions that will create a sense of community, and that will allow for a deeper level of shared understanding. By sharing your personal reflections, you can create a community of like-minded individuals and help others to feel less alone. This community aspect can also foster new insights and can help to create a space for the ongoing exploration of this complex and important topic. This conversation can become a powerful tool for transforming negative feelings into positive personal growth, and also for contributing to creating a more compassionate world. What personal insights can you now share with others, and how can this lead to a deeper level of shared understanding?